You're looking at the Nippon Budokan Arena near the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. This is where the state funeral for former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo will begin very soon. Inside, over 4,000 people have just taken their seats. Among the attendees are several members of Japan's imperial family, including Crown Prince and Crown Princess Akishino. About 700 foreign dignitaries are also here. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have flown in, along with some former world leaders who had close ties to Abe. Welcome to this special edition of NHK Newsline. I'm Yamamoto Miki. The sudden death of Abe Shinzo sent shockwaves throughout Japan and beyond. The former leader had just begun a July campaign speech when he was shot dead. Today, we will provide an in-depth look at the life and legacy of this country's longest-serving prime minister. But first, let's head back outside. This is how things look right now from the air. The motorcade that's bringing Abe's cremated remains to the ceremony is passing by the Defense Ministry right now. The late Prime Minister strongly committed himself to national and regional security during his time in office. His route to the ceremony venue has taken the vehicles past places he was deeply connected to, just as it did during a private funeral held soon after Abe's death. Now we see the vehicle that is carrying Abe's cremated remains. Abe's widow, Akie, is in the car too. Honor guards are receiving the motorcade. Now, my colleague Raja Pradhan has been following the divide in public opinion about this event and is now standing by near the Nippon Budokan Arena. So, Raja, what are you seeing and hearing there?
Miki, thousands of people have been coming to Kudanzaka Park just behind me since the morning. It's the site of a memorial for the public to pay their respects to the nation's longest-serving prime minister. It actually opened half an hour early just because of the long line stretching several blocks. Now, people have been had to go through security, including being checked with a metal detector to come through. Well, I've seen a variety of people here, young, old, foreigners. They're bringing flowers, even some with the national flag, and placing them in front of Abe's photo right there. And I spoke with some of them, and one woman told me she wanted to pay her respects because she thinks Abe was the cornerstone of foreign affairs, bringing Japan to where it is now because of his leadership. Now, while people here appreciate this memorial, many do not agree with why the government is holding this state funeral for Abe. Thousands protested from noon in another part of Tokyo, one of many demonstrations in the past couple of months against holding the state funeral. Another protest is about to get underway in front of the Diet. And they argue the funeral is a personal service for bereaved families and friends, and taxpayer money should not be used for this. The event is estimated to cost more than $11 million. Well, state funerals are rare here in Japan, and in Japan's post-war history, there's only been one other state funeral for a former prime minister. Current Prime Minister Kishida Fumio said this state funeral is for mourning Abe and at the same time showing the country's resolve to protect democracy without yielding to violence. But recent polls suggest many people are not buying it. Regardless, the funeral is just moments away, and I'll be back with more later. But for now, I'm going to hand it back to you, Miki.
Thanks, Raja, and he'll be covering stories there throughout the day. Now, Abe's own political history was not without controversy, and his more than 80 years as leader will long be remembered. Let's take a look back.
Politics ran deep in Abe's DNA. He was the grandson of a Japanese leader and the son of a foreign minister. At the age of 52, he became prime minister, the youngest since World War II.
日本が世界の国々から信頼され、そして尊敬され、子どもたちが日本に生まれたことを誇りに思える美しい国、日本を作ってまいりたい。
His first stint didn't last long. Only a year after taking office, Abe lost the upper house election. He stepped down, citing health problems. 5 years later, he made a comeback. He led the Liberal Democratic Party to an overwhelming election win, becoming prime minister once again. Abe pursued an ambitious foreign policy. He built relationships with world leaders and strengthened global ties. One of his most famous relationships was with U.S. President Donald Trump. The men were golf buddies.
We have a very, very good bond, very, very good chemistry.
Abe became one of Trump's closest foreign allies. One of his achievements was winning the bid to host the Olympics. At the closing ceremony of the Rio Games, he made this appearance, promoting Tokyo to the world. Back at home, Abe's push to boost defense capabilities sparked controversy. He led the charge to reinterpret the Constitution and redefine Japan's self-defense forces amid growing tensions with China and North Korea.
私たちの平和は人から与えられるものではない。私たち自身で築き上げるほかに道はありません。
Debate over the move was so fierce, it caused this famous moment in the Diet. Throughout his time as leader, Abe was dogged by scandals, including accusations he used taxpayers' money to entertain constituents at a party. Another involved favoritism and state land sold for a school, which Abe denied.
私や妻が関係していたということになれば間違いない。総理大臣も国会議員も辞めるということははっきりと申し上げておきたい。
Abe won 6 elections in 8 years as prime minister, becoming Japan's longest-serving leader. But his health worsened, and he stepped down in August of 2020. He remained influential within his own party, an assertive voice among conservatives in Japan.
Now, throughout today's program, we will be digging into Abe's legacy and breaking down the ceremony with the help of 2 people in the studio. First, we have Professor Hikotani Takako from Gakushuin University in Tokyo. She's an expert on Japanese politics and foreign policy. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
And we have NHK World Senior Political Commentator Masuda Tsuyoshi with us. So, Professor Hikotani, first, what are you watching for at this ceremony?
Yes, given all the controversy that surrounded this funeral, I'm really looking forward to what the Prime Minister, Kishida, has to say in the speech, as well as what former Prime Minister Suga, who was a very close friend of Prime Minister Abe, how he's going to honor him in the speech.
Yes, Kishida will speak on behalf of the country, and
Yes.
Suga will speak on behalf of Abe's friends. So
Yes.
we'll be looking forward to what they will have to say.
Yes.
All right. Now, Tsuyoshi, just a few moments ago, Raja, we heard from Raja about the stark differences in how the public view this event. What do the polls say?
Public opinion is indeed divided, and it's not accurate to say public opinion is evenly balanced. Rather, the opposition is far greater than the support. NHK released an opinion poll on September 12th. It shows 32% of respondents approved of the plan, while 57% disapproved. Opinion polls by other media outlets show similar results, or even wider margins. As a result, the approval rating of Kishida's cabinet has declined sharply. In another NHK opinion poll this month, 40% of respondents said they support the cabinet, down 6 points from last month. 40% said they don't support it, a 12-point increase. The percentage of people who said they support the cabinet is the lowest since Kishida took office a year ago. Other surveys show a similar trend. Some show disapproval outweighing support.
So why has this issue been so toxic for Kishida?
I think it's because the government's explanation of the reasons for the funeral failed to win the public's understanding. Kishida cited 4 reasons for the ceremony. 1. Abe served as Prime Minister for 8 years and 8 months. That's the longest in the history of Japan's constitutional government. 2. He achieved great things in domestic and foreign affairs. 3. He's been highly praised by the international community. 4. He died in a sudden barbaric act amid an election, the foundation of democracy. But such an assessment is not absolute. It can change suddenly, depending on the international climate and the political situation here at home. The leader of the main opposition, Constitutional Democratic Party, Izumi Kenta, points out former Prime Minister Sato Eisaku was the longest-serving Prime Minister in post-war Japan when he died. And moreover, Sato was a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, but he did not get the state funeral.
Okay, we are looking outside now. The motorcade has arrived at the funeral venue, and now Kishida is meeting them. Abe's widow Akie is holding the urn. Kishida will now lead the way into the funeral hall. A 19-gun salute in Abe's honor performed by the Self-Defense Force Honor Guard. The mourners have now entered the venue. So while we wait for this ceremony to begin, Professor, I'd like to ask you what stood out to you most about Prime Minister Abe Shinzo?
Yes, as a headline in Economist magazine said right after his assassination, what stood out the most was the fact that he was a champion of Japan, or people perceived as such. And that sometimes led to some criticisms about people who did not share his vision of Japan, both domestically and abroad. But I think nobody doubted that he was a champion of Japan, and that stood out to me the most.
What do you think enabled him to be in power for so long, 8 years and 8 months?
Yes. So I think he learned the lessons from his first term, which was only for one year. And his second term was more careful about making sure that he has the time to achieve what he wanted to achieve. And for that, he was very strategic in calling on elections, and actually did win 6 elections in a row. And those things made it possible for him to hold on for power for so long, and it enabled him to achieve what he did, which in the end helped him prolong his power again. So I think that was what's most notable about how he was in power for so long and ended up becoming the longest-serving prime minister in Japan.
I think one of the things that's notable is his popularity with the young people. What can you say to that?
Yes, I guess I go back to the champion issue, that I think he portrayed Japan, or he led Japan in a way that made the young people proud. And he was a prime minister for a very long time, so he was almost the only prime minister that most people who are very young remember. And I think that kind of attitude led to his popularity among the young people.
Okay, thank you. Now let's head inside the funeral venue. More than 4,000 people from across Japan and abroad have gathered to pay their respects. For those of you just joining us, this is a special edition of NHK Newsline for the state funeral of former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. Abe's remains will be brought into the hall shortly. Abe's photo is placed atop a flower decoration. The motif is Japan's snow-covered mountains, the beauty of which Abe adored. People from across Japan and abroad are waiting for Abe's remains to come into the hall. Abe Shinzo's time in office was record-breaking. He was 52 years old when he first became prime minister in 2006, making him post-war Japan's youngest leader. Over the course of 2 terms, Abe would spend a total of 8 years and 8 months at the helm, as we've been talking about. That made him the longest-serving prime minister in Japanese history. And he was 67 years old when he was shot dead on July 8th in Nara City. He was delivering a speech for a Liberal Democratic Party candidate just days before Japan's upper house election. The event was held in a public square near a railway station. The police in charge of Abe's security detail have admitted there were major faults in their plans. Officers were looking elsewhere. A man with a makeshift gun walked up behind the former prime minister. Now let's listen in with simultaneous interpretation.
葬儀委員長、ご遺族の皆様、葬儀副委員長、
Chair of the Funeral Committee, the bereaved family, and Deputy Chair of the Funeral Committee, please advance to your seats.
Shortly,
we will receive the attendance of the imperial family members. Crown Prince Akishino and Crown Princess Kiko, Princess Kako of Akishino, Princess Mikasa, Princess Akiko of Mikasa, and Princess Takamado and Princess Tsuguko of Takamado are in attendance.
Abe's urn is now placed at the center and the funeral is about to begin. So, Tsuyoshi, you've been covering Japanese politics for many years now. What kind of presence did Abe have in Japanese politics?
He had a very strong presence and was undoubtedly one of Japan's leading conservative figures. He had been born into a prestigious political family. His grandfather was Kishi Nobusuke, Prime Minister between 1957 and 1960. His father, Abe Shintaro, served as Foreign Minister. He was expected to be a future conservative political leader since he was young. In 2006, at the age of 52, he became the youngest Prime Minister since World War II. He stepped down after 1 year, but made a comeback in 2012. He served as Prime Minister for about 8 years until 2020. During this period, he won 6 national elections, making him the longest-serving Prime Minister in the history of Japan's constitutional government.
Right. And what do you think was his biggest focus during his time in office?
Aside from anything in the fields of diplomacy and economy, I think his biggest achievement was the enactment of a national security legislation. The legislation allows Japan to exercise the right to collective self-defense. This was a major shift from the nation's much more restrained post-war security policy. It came as the security environment surrounding Japan was becoming increasingly tense, with China continuing its military build-up and North Korea advancing its nuclear and missile development. But many people opposed the security legislation, saying it violated the Constitution. Public opinion was split. But pressing ahead with policies that fiercely divided public opinion, saying he had won an election mandate, were characteristic of Abe's political style. He had passionate supporters, mainly conservatives, who were described as his bedrock. Others strongly opposed his views. Abe sometimes turned such confrontation into a source of energy.
We can't lose to such people.
Well, anyone who follows Japanese politics knows that Abe was also at the center of more than one scandal. What can you tell us about that?
True. For one, he was accused of using taxpayers' money to entertain supporters at a party. Another involved allegations of favoritism and the sale of state land for a school. Abe denied these accusations. So his politics were a turbulent mix of light and shadow. Opinions on his policies were often quite divided. In a way, the divisions over his state funeral symbolize his political style.
All right, now let's go back to the Nippon Budokan, where the state funeral is about to get underway. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Matsuno Hirokazu will open the ceremony.
We would now like to hold the state funeral to honor former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. Please rise. Japan's national anthem will be played.
Abe Shinzo 元内閣総理大臣に黙祷を捧げます。
Please observe a moment of silence for former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo.
黙祷。黙祷を終わります。 ご着席願います。
はい、いいですか。日本を世界の人々が
I'm determined to do all I can to make Japan a beautiful country that the world respects and adores, and our children feel proud of.
全身全霊を傾けて挑戦していく覚悟であります。
I will build on my experience as leading the government and the experience of failure. Fukushima will not restore without Tohoku's restoration, nor revitalization of Japan without Tohoku's recovery. Please take care of yourself.
By my Abenomics.
We will throw strongly 3 arrows. This is a growth strategy of bold financial policies, agile fiscal policy, and invite private investment. As the edge of a drill, I will break the bedrock of government regulations. The major challenge is to reform how people work. I will boldly carry through reforms necessary for Japan where people live to 100 years old. I will boldly develop a social security system appropriate for a Reiwa era, of which people of all generations feel assured of. Diversity taking advantage of women's abilities will solve social problems and bring about strong economic growth. If Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Brothers and Sisters, it wouldn't have gone bankrupt. TPP is designed for a country for the next 100 years. We will extend the 21st century's economic order to the world as a champion of free trade.
Japan is back.
The Prime Minister of Japan.
Let us call the U.S.-Japan alliance an alliance of hope to make the world a much better place to live.
The vast expanse of the seas and skies from the Indian Pacific to the Pacific should serve the foundation for peace and prosperity for all countries, small and large. Japan will develop a free and open Indo-Pacific. President, colleagues, Megumi and many other Japanese have been abducted by North Korea. I will do whatever I can do so that they will come back to motherland and reunite their fathers, mothers, and family members. Our peace is not given by others. We must build it by ourselves. Your duty is to resolutely defend lives and peaceful living of the Japanese people under any circumstances. You have been performing your duties without hesitating self-sacrifice. I'm proud of you. Our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come are not responsible for that war. They shouldn't be burdened with having to keep apologizing. Our children are the future of the country. All children should be able to have hope for the future, regardless of their economic and financial situations, and work hard for their dreams. Let's start building a Japan where everyone can realize their potential. I want a Japan where everyone can have hope for the future and flourish. The future of Japan depends on what we do now. Instead of holding back with pessimism, let's move forward with confidence. Instead of being drawn back from harsh reality, let's rise together for a bright future. Thank you. Shall I repeat?
Tadaima wa kojin o shinobi, seizen no osugata o outsushi itashimashita.
We brought to you footage looking back on the former Prime Minister's life. Now we call on the chair of the funeral committee, Prime Minister Kishida Fumio, to offer his words of condolences. In holding the state funeral of Ju-ichi, caller of the Supreme Order of the Chrysanthemum, former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, on behalf of the Japanese government, I would like to humbly offer my words of condolence. On July 8th, as we were headed for the last stretch of the election campaign. Mr. Abe, as usual, you were passionately speaking to the public of the path this country should take. Suddenly, you were interrupted by violence, and then what should never have happened took place. Who would have foreseen that such a day would come to us? Mr. Abe, you were a person who should have lived much, much longer. As a compass for Japan and the world's future, you would have worked for 20 more years until there's no energy left in you. I'm certain you would have dedicated yourself. It's not only me. All of us here today, from every corner of our society and from all around the world, and also from the regions, people who miss you have come to pay their respects. I think they are looking at you right now with the same sentiment I currently have. But we can no longer see you in action. It is regrettable and heartbreaking. 29 years ago, at the 40th lower house elections, we both won a seat as rookies and entered this world of politics. As a colleague, I had first-hand view of how unwavering you were in learning and improving your expertise in security, diplomacy, economy, as well as social security. Above all, regarding the abduction of Japanese nationals by North Korea, even before you became a member of the Diet, you had felt a strong anger and with sense of justice. You deepened your involvement into this matter. I know how regrettable it must be for you that not all the victims were brought back home. I will continue in your footsteps and put all my might into bringing home the abductees to their families who are waiting for their return. In 2006, at the age of 52, you became the Prime Minister of Japan, a first post-war born leader. You have spearheaded our generation, and at the time, I was thrilled and excited with expectation to witness you tackle the very fundamental issues of our nation that has been left unattended after the war. Our nation, Japan, is rich in beautiful nature, and we have long history and unique culture. There are still many possibilities to this country. It is up to us, our courage, wisdom, and effort to bring out those possibilities. We should discuss what we need to do for tomorrow's Japan and be proud of this country. The message from the youngest Prime Minister after World War II to the people of Japan was like this, simple and clear. Exiting the post-war regime, upgrading the defense agency to a ministry that can compile their own budget, to introducing the national referendum law. That was a large bridge you have built towards revising the Constitution. For the first time in about 6 decades, you were able to revise the basic law on education to sow the seeds of Japan's identity. In a speech you delivered at the Parliament of India, you discussed confluence of the 2 seas and introduced the concept for the first time of Indo-Pacific. All of these have been the cornerstones you have placed to lead to where we are today. At around this time, in the Diet session, you were asked what a Prime Minister entails. Your answer was that melted steel could flow into a mold, but will not become a casted steel. Struck again and again, forged over and over, the steel becomes a finished product, a strong finished product. That's what a Prime Minister is all about. This is what you answered. It is so like you to compare it to steel, since you started your career in the steel business. I know it was extremely difficult for you to resign as a Prime Minister only after 1 year in office. However, we all know what happened after that. In 2012, until you returned to Prime Minister again, you were strengthening yourself to become the strong steel you talked about. With this concept of confluence of 2 seas, you deepened that into the concept of free and open Indo-Pacific, which was fostered to a framework that is inclusive of many people and nations. You strengthened relations with the United States to new heights and reinforced the Japan-U.S. deterrence. And as you have always been calling for, you deepened cooperation with India and Australia to establish the framework of the Quad. Your multi-layered diplomacy has built good relations with every region of the globe. Signing the Economic Partnership Agreement and Strategic Partnership Agreement with Europe, the unprecedented bold and candid diplomacy engagement with Asia, Eurasia, Middle East, Africa, and Central and South America has led to building deep cooperative relations. Law for peace and security, act on the protection of specially designated secrets. You overcame tough processes to realize these so that safety could be maintained for our nation. Japan, regions, global security are all supported by this reliable roof you've erected. You have maintained and also promoted open international order that lays importance on freedom, democracy, human rights, and rule of law. Nobody has dedicated themselves like you have. As a foreign minister, as a comrade who lived in the same era, and as a member of your cabinet, I was privileged to broaden the horizon of Japan's diplomacy. I am proud to have been able to dedicate myself to that work. In domestic affairs, you encourage young people, especially women. You try to ease the pressure of child rearing to realize the desired birth rate for us. Instead of raising the consumption tax, you made the decision to spend increased income from taxes towards lowering childcare and education fees. You did this because you believed that the Japanese youth who regain confidence will one day create something new to push our country forward. Your government is the longest-serving government in Japan's post-war history. History will remember you not for the length served, but for your achievements. Courage is doing what is right. You quoted Nitoge Inazo at the graduation ceremony of the National Defense Academy.
Is doing what is right.
Courage is doing what is right. Mr. Abe, you were that person of courage, truly sincere, and with passion and merciful. You took good care of your friends. You deeply loved your wife, Akie. You were a great husband. I will always remember you with fond memories. People around Japan and the world will reminisce about Prime Minister Abe's time, the Abe era, and will always remember you. Based on the foundation you have built, I pledge to create a Japan, a region, a world that is sustainable, where all people will shine as themselves. With that pledge, as my words of condolences, Mr. Abe, Prime Minister Abe, thank you for your service. Thank you very much. Please rest in peace. 2022, September 27th, Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida Fumio.
Hosoda Hiroyuki, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
That was Prime Minister Kishida Fumio delivering a speech commemorating Abe and his political legacy. More speeches are following. Now, let's check in again with NHK World's Raja Pradhan, who is near the venue. So, Raja, what's the mood like there right now?
Nikki, the stream of people coming to visit the public memorial is still steady, and the mood is somber, with quite a few people shedding tears as they laid flowers in front of Abe's photo. Now, I want to turn our attention to something hard not to notice here, and that's the security. Take a look at this. This line of buses stretches all the way down this road, which leads to the Budokan Arena. These are all just for police. This is part of a new protocol in place to ensure the safety of people at the funeral. And we're seeing this for the first time since Abe was shot in broad daylight during a campaign speech in July. The police in charge of his security detail admitted major faults in their plans may have allowed the shooter to get within close range. This time, nearly 20,000 police officers have been deployed to the Budokan and across the capital. And as I was heading into this area, there were numerous traffic restrictions in place along the route used by the funeral motorcade and dignitaries. Well, I've covered several high-profile events here in Japan, but I've never seen such a big police presence before. And despite that, things seem to be going pretty smoothly here, at least for now. For now, it's back to you, Miki.
Thank you very much, Raja. We're now going back inside the Budokan, where former Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide will be speaking. He will deliver a eulogy on behalf of Abe's close friends.
9月27日
参議院議長尾辻秀久様
Chairman of the House of Councillors, Otsuji Hidehisa. The House of Councillors offers deep respect to the late Abe Shinzo, member of the House of Representatives, and decorated with the Order of Great Chrysanthemum for the contribution to the development of democratic politics of Japan. Through serving as Prime Minister for the longest period of time in Japan's constitutional history. 27th of September 2022.
最高裁判所長官戸倉三郎様
Tokura Saburo, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. May I express my heartfelt condolences over the passing of Mr. Abe Shinzo, former Prime Minister, decorated with the Order of Chrysanthemum. Mr. Abe dedicated himself throughout his life to Japan with strong leadership and foresight, particularly when Japan was undergoing a period of change and experiencing difficult domestic and international issues. Mr. Abe devoted himself to the prosperity of Japan as Prime Minister, performing heavy duties for this country. Mr. Abe's sudden passing is deeply regrettable. I sincerely express my deep condolences and pray for the repose of his soul. 27th September 2022, Tokura Saburo, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Representative of former Prime Minister Abe's closest colleagues, Suga Yoshihide. It was July 8th. I received the initial report that was beyond my belief. I prayed for your survival with all my might. I had to see you with my own eyes. I needed to be in the same space, sharing the same atmosphere. These were the thoughts running in my mind as I rushed to where you were. And I was able to be in touch with your distinctive smile for one last time. From that defining moment, 80 days have passed. The sun still rises and sets, as it has always been. The buzzing noises of the cicadas have quieted down with the lapse of time. In the tall autumn sky are the beautiful clouds. Seasons change, and time passes, though we no longer have you with us. In the transience of time, I am still grieving. Why your life had to be taken away in such a tragic way, when you were so indispensable for us? Why did it have to be you when we needed you? I'm still in deep regret, oscillating between the senses of sorrow and anger. I am standing here today. Let me call you Prime Minister Abe. But can you see down here? Around the Budokan is a great number of people who wish to lay flowers of condolence and to be present at the state funeral. Many are in their 20s and 30s. These young people, whose shoulders will bear the future of this country, are coming here to send you off. Prime Minister Abe, you had a strong determination to create a country with a brighter future, towards which the youth can have a sense of hope. On a daily basis, you were talking to the people. You used to say that Japan and Japanese people shall proudly bloom at the center of the world. You always used to say this. You believe that it is imperative for the youth to be able to have high hopes for a bright future, for the nation's economy to grow. That there are so many young people bidding you last farewell is something that I am so proud of as a person who had the honor of walking beside you. How I feel rewarded. In the year 2000, the government of Japan was contemplating sending rice to North Korea. I was still a fledgling Diet member, serving my second term. But that did not stop me from saying that we never knew if the rice goes to the people. I argued that unless we are certain it goes to the people, we should not do anything that would benefit the North Korean military. I said so at the LDP General Council. When you read a news article about my statement, you telephoned me, telling me you wanted to see me. You said, what I said was right. In order to rescue Japanese people abducted by North Korea, will you work with me? You said to me. Your powerful words filled with sense of determination have always been a source of my political activities ever since. Your straightforward vision, your resolute stance moved me. I found it intuitively that you were the person who will be the Prime Minister of this country. You are the person who should lead the country. I was so convinced. What I have been so proud throughout my political career is that my conviction has never been shaken, not once. Prime Minister, when your health deteriorated, you had to step down. Feeling indebted, you were hesitant to run for the LDP presidency for the second time. We ended up going to a yakitori bar in Ginza, where I persuaded that you run, because I thought that was my mission and responsibility to do so. 3 years into the dinner, you finally said yes to me. That was the moment of the greatest achievement of my life. I would always fondly remember that moment. When you were in the official residence of the Prime Minister, I never missed a day visiting your office to have a small talk. When I'm alone, these memories vividly come back. Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiation was something I thought we should be spending more time before starting. But you said that we should not miss the right timing. You were of an opinion that it should be sooner than later. Who was right on this argument is already a history. Backing off can undermine the impetus. You believe that the path can be paved by advancing ahead. Your judgment was always right. Prime Minister Abe, with such an indispensable leader like you, Japan has been able to pass all the difficult bills, such as the Act on the Protection of Specially Designated Secrets, legislation for peace and security, and revised Act on Punishment of Organized Crimes. Without any one of these, safety and security of our country cannot be ensured. To your belief and determination, that we offer our eternal appreciation. Breaking through the national challenge, we need to build a strong Japan. As a genuinely pacifist nation, making Japan a country that can make contributions to the world in many different areas. With this sense of determination, and faced with difficult decisions on a daily basis, Prime Minister, you never forget to smile. You are always considerate of people around you with all your generosity and kindness. At the Prime Minister's office, I spent 7 years and 8 months with you, sharing all the joy and happiness. All staff were working through the difficult days happily, working for the cause. Let me reiterate, Prime Minister Abe, you were, for Japan, the true leader.
In the room 1212 of the First Diet Members Hall, there was your desk onto which you started reading rested. It was a book titled Yamagata Aritomo by Oka Yoshitake. You dog-eared the book to tell how many pages you have read. A phrase on that page was highlighted with a pen. And that was the verse by Yamagata Aritomo, written for his longtime friend, Ito Hirobumi, when he died. This is the verse that best describes what I feel now. The man I confabulated with and dedicated myself for has left this world. How should I deal with the world with the remaining time of my life? The man I confabulated with and dedicated myself for has left this world. How should I deal with the world with the remaining time of my life? I'm in deep sorrow and I feel lonely. Thank you so much for all you have done. May you rest in peace. September 27, 2022, former Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide.
ただいまから勅使皇后宮使のご拝礼がございます。
The envoys of
ご起立願います。
Emperor Emeritus and Empress Emerita offers their prayers. The envoys of the Emperor and Empress offer their prayers.
上皇使上皇后宮使のご拝礼がござい
The
ます。
envoys of the Emperor Emeritus and the Empress Emerita offer their prayers.
秋篠宮皇嗣同妃両殿下
Crown Prince
佳子内親王
Akishino
殿
and
下
Crown Princess Kiko,
友仁
Princess
親王
Kako of
妃信子殿
Akishino,
下
Princess
彬子女
Mikasa,
王殿下
Princess Akiko of
典仁
Mikasa,
親王妃久子殿
Princess
下
Takamado,
継子女王殿下
Princess
のご
Tsuguko
供
of
花がございます。
Takamado will be offering flowers.
imperial family members paying their respects there. So Professor Hikotani, we heard from Prime Minister Kishida and former Prime Minister Suga a short while ago. What did you make of their speeches?
Yes, a couple of things. One, I think it was very striking that it sounded like a speech not for a former prime minister, but highlighted how present he still was in Japanese politics. It's almost as if his passing reminded people how present he was. That is how Prime Minister Kishida opened the speech by expecting Prime Minister Abe to be around for 10, 20 more years, and former Prime Minister Suga ending his speech by him still wanting to talk to him over days. And that was what really struck me the most, was how present and current Prime Minister Abe was. Two more things. One, they both emphasized their friendship, and their comrade was the word used by Prime Minister Kishida. All three of them were elected for the first time in the same year, in the same election. And I think the differences among them tends to be highlighted. Prime Minister Kishida and Prime Minister Abe are at the very different places in ideological spectrum within the LDP. Prime Minister Kishida known to be more dovish, and Prime Minister Abe known to be more hawkish. But even with that, I thought the sense of the camaraderie that Prime Minister Kishida expressed was very interesting. Same is true for Prime Minister Suga. I think we weren't that aware of the closeness of the relationship, especially given the backgrounds being very different. Prime Minister coming from more of a privileged background with family, his grandfather being the former Prime Minister, and Prime Minister coming from a less privileged background. But I think the bond that he mentioned throughout the years, and how much he was a fan, in a way, of Prime Minister Abe that came through in the speech was very striking. And also the North Korean abduction issue being a common topic that was discussed by both of them, right, shows how strongly Prime Minister Abe felt about the topic. That was something that was reminded of through these two speeches. Finally, the last word that struck me was the word courage. What Prime Minister Kishida cited from a commencement speech by Prime Minister Abe at the National Defense Academy. Courage is doing what is right. I used to teach at the National Defense Academy. The Prime Minister comes to the commencement or graduation every year. And that for a while it was always Prime Minister Abe because he was a very long-serving Prime Minister. But I do think that the word courage is something, along with being the champion of Japan, is something that people remember him for. Although people might not agree with what he was courageous for, I think everybody would agree that he was a very courageous Prime Minister.
So from what we've heard and what you know, what can you tell us about Suga and Kishida's relationship with Abe?
Kishida was a foreign minister to Abe during the long administration. Suga was cabinet secretary to Prime Minister Abe, and I think they worked almost as a team. And that I guess we haven't heard that many personal stories between Kishida and Abe, but I think they had a very good working relationship. For instance, one of the major accomplishments of Prime Minister Abe was inviting President Obama to give a speech in Hiroshima. That I'm sure was helped by the fact that Kishida was foreign minister then, and he is from Hiroshima. He's holding the summit next year in Hiroshima. But that helped in laying the groundwork and making sure that something that I think would have seemed more controversial and difficult for most people at that time was accomplished, had a lot to do with the teamwork between the two. Same is true for Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Suga on the domestic front and all the economic agenda that former Prime Minister Suga mentioned, I think, as a result of a teamwork between the two.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's break away from the ceremony for a moment to delve into another aspect of Abe's legacy. The former Prime Minister's memory will be forever tied to an aggressive set of economic policies that aim to pull Japan out of protracted deflation and kickstart growth. Here's a look at Abenomics.
これまでとは次元の違う 大胆な政策パッケージを提示します。強い経済を取り戻していこうではありませんか。
Abenomics.
Abenomics.
By my Abenomics.
Abenomics consisted of 3 arrows: ultra-monetary easing to flood the market with money, a boost in government spending, and implementation of a set of structural reforms. The Prime Minister appointed the current Bank of Japan Governor, Kuroda Haruhiko, to take the role of releasing the first arrow.
I will pursue bold monetary easing, utilizing both quantitative and qualitative measures. Through those efforts, the 2% inflation target should be achieved. I am convinced it's an achievable target.
Following the massive monetary easing, the yen, which Japanese companies had complained was too strong, started to weaken. This was welcomed by the markets. Stock prices rose on expectations that exporters' earnings would improve. But this did not last long. When Kuroda took office, he said the inflation goal could be achieved in about 2 years. But price rises continued to struggle well below the 2% line, while the economy put in a mediocre performance. That was attributed to the government's failure to push through structural reforms to stimulate the economy. Wages have barely increased. The ruling parties and the government continued with their aggressive spending by issuing bonds as stimulus. The Bank of Japan facilitated the funding by purchasing nearly half of them. As a result, the amount of yen increased and the Japanese currency became weaker. Japan's GDP has grown only slightly over the past decade. But in dollar terms, it is now 2/3 the value compared to when Abenomics was launched. Monetary easing, which was supposed to achieve its target in 2 years, is still in place 9.5 years later. Meanwhile, Japan's economic growth rate has been going back and forth between positive and negative territory.
So, Professor Hikotani, what is your take on Abenomics?
Yes, I think as the video showed, I think the verdict is still mixed, especially on, there is something to be said about how everybody around the world, many people knew about the word Abenomics, and that he said, buy my Abenomics, and that was a well-known thing, and that I think the fact that the government was trying to make things happen was well known. But I think the third arrow, especially promoting structural reforms, is something that obviously does take a long term, but is still something to be seen.
Now, in a little while, foreign dignitaries will take their turn to pay respects to the former Prime Minister by laying flowers. But while we wait for that to happen, I'd like to talk about Abe's international agenda while he was leader. Why do you think he devoted so much energy into diplomacy? Why was it so important to him?
I think the 2 speeches by the 2 former prime ministers partly answer your question, that he wanted to become prime minister because he wanted to make Japan bloom in the center of the world again, and that was a driver of his intention to become prime minister. Some attributed his family lineage to be something that has to do with his intention, but I think he really wanted Japan to be more proud and more show a vision of the world, present a vision to the world in a way that other prime ministers didn't do, especially after the war. And I think from what we heard from his speeches, that was something that might have been shared by politicians his generation, being born after the war. And that's something that he wanted to achieve for the next generation, and that he thought that diplomacy was key for Japan to regain that position in the world.
And by focusing on diplomacy, how do you think Japan's position changed around the world?
Right. I think his major accomplishments are, one, strengthening the U.S.-Japan alliance, but also what tends to be not as seen is his vision of presenting a panoramic view, diplomacy with a panoramic view of the world, and his showing a vision of the free and open Indo-Pacific. Especially in the latter half of the second administration during President Trump, I think the world was uneasy about who exactly will be able to lead the Western world in turbulent times. But Abe strategically reached out to the Quad countries, India and Australia, to broaden the strategic horizon for Japan, but also to lend some stability in the region. And also reached out to Africa and also to Europe to mainstream the diplomacy to Europe as one of the main focuses of Japan's diplomacy as well. So reaching out to other countries, he traveled to many countries, was to say, in a way, for him, a way for Japan to be stronger again, and also, and that was something that I think we've seen after his passing that was more less appreciated, especially by the Western countries. That's been what's been seen since his passing, that people seem to have appreciated his leadership in the turbulent times.
And speaking of the Indo-Pacific and Quad, as you mentioned, India did play a big part in Abe's efforts in achieving that. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi is present today. How did Japan's relationship with India change during Abe?
Right. This is something that's notable from his first term. There was a mentioning about his speech that he gave in Kishida's speech about the confluence of the two seas, that confluence of the two seas being Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. But he made it something that continued on from first administration to second to reach out to India. And there was it is said that there was a very strong personal tie bond between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Kishida. Prime Minister Modi was one of the very few world leaders that was invited to Prime Minister Abe's villa in the mountains, and that also is seen to show a personal tie. But I think for Japan, looking at the world, considering China and Russia and other parts of the world, he thought that having a bond with India was very crucial for Japan going forward, given India's potential. And I think that was something that was a breakthrough for Japan's diplomacy and something that was definitely led by Prime Minister Abe.
And as we watch these pictures, let's talk about Abe's relationship with the countries that are represented here today. And first, I'd like to start off with the United States. Abe always talked about the U.S. as being Japan's most important partner in terms of economy and defense. How did that alliance change or develop during the Abe administration?
Right. Especially when he came in 2012, he was concerned that unless Japan steps up on its own defense, that it will be very difficult to sustain the U.S.-Japan alliance going forward. And he was a believer in the U.S.-Japan alliance to be the best way for Japan to keep itself safe. And for that, I think the energy that he devoted in the first half of his second administration to pass the peace and security legislation and to reinterpret the Constitution to do that was a major challenge for him. It cost him domestically, but it was something that was an accomplishment, made it possible for him to manage the relationship between U.S. and Japan during the Trump administration. That he accomplished that to make sure that the U.S.-Japan alliance is in order, and that really helped him leading on to the Trump administration and today. So that, I think, is what's notable. And I think the ambassadors that were in Japan during the whole term is very appreciative of that, shown by the fact that I've heard that they are all in attendance today, and that shows how much U.S.-Japan, the attention to the United States and strengthening the alliance was high on Abe's agenda, and that feeling is reciprocated by the U.S. side.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris is present here, and we'll probably see her very soon laying flowers there. And one of the most impressive, if I may, president that had connection with Abe would probably be Donald Trump. What is your assessment about their relationship?
Right. So Donald Trump, I think, in one of the footages mentioned that they had a really good chemistry. And I don't really know if Prime Minister Abe would agree that there was a serious chemistry between the two. But I think it's true that he knew that he had to work with President Trump. And he had a really good hunch about what to do. Going to see him right after the election when other leaders were more ambivalent about his election result. I think he got to know President Trump when President Trump was uneasy about his own leadership in the world. And that helped him along the way, that President Trump did seem to rely on Prime Minister Abe as a friend in the world scene in many situations. And that was something that made it possible for them to have the U.S.-Japan alliance survive in a way. That was a lot of people worried about the Trump administration, the President Trump's rhetoric over the election, during the election, about being more hawkish in terms of the trade issue and all that. And I think it became, the U.S.-Japan alliance was a lot more stable due to the personal relationship. The other thing that I think is interesting is that although, unfortunately, the U.S. exited the TPP, the fact that Abe was able to proceed with that without angering President Trump anyway, and that was very much appreciated by other countries, is also based on the personal relationship between Donald Trump and President Abe. And that one of my friends who work in the U.S. administration on trade had mentioned to me that TPP was still high on Prime Minister Abe's agenda or Abe's mind, that when she met with him recently, he still asked her whether there's any chance still that the U.S. will still return. So although there are things that didn't go his way during the Trump administration, I think he had a more long-term vision, and that probably helped him in managing the ties with President Trump, even in turbulent times.
And at the ceremony, looks like foreign dignitaries are now getting their turn to lay flowers for former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. Professor, now I'd like to go to China. What stood out to you about Abe's relationship with Beijing?
Well, especially in 2012 when he came back, the relationship with China was at a very difficult point with the Senkaku nationalization becoming a bit of a throne, or like a major point of dispute between China, and that was very difficult to see how the previous agreement that he made in 2006 of a mutually beneficial relationship based on common strategic interests can be sustained in the second administration. And I think although his efforts initially seemed to be somewhat awkward, there was a famous photo of Abe-Xi meeting, a photo opportunity that seemed like the relationship was not as friendly. I think he tried to have a relationship that could be called a man and strategic competition, and that I think it's easy to forget because of COVID that there was an open invitation for Xi Jinping to come when the cherry blossoms bloom in 2020. And I do think that even without COVID, that might have been difficult now, given deterioration of U.S.-China relationship, what happening in Hong Kong and Xinjiang. I think it would have been still difficult. But I think he did try to find a way to maintain a relationship with China that is more managed, and even with economic challenges that China is presenting, that he tried to find a way to manage the relationship with China. And that we have to see in the years to come whether his efforts would have paid off.
Right. And right now we're seeing U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris on her way to laying flowers. She's here, of course, on behalf of the Biden administration and the U.S. people. Kamala Harris there, waiting for her turn to lay her flowers.
And I think that is the previous ambassadors with her. We see Caroline Kennedy, Ambassador Kennedy, and I think that was all the recent ambassadors all in one screen.
It's difficult to recognize them with their masks.
Yes, but I think that's Rahm Emanuel right behind Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris.
So the U.S. delegation.
Yes. And that's Catherine Tai, I think, who is the USTR, the trade representative.
It shows how much importance the U.S. puts its relationship with Japan.
Yes, I guess because there was some level of disappointment about the fact that President Biden could not come. But I think this shows how much the U.S. does care about paying respect to Prime Minister Abe.
Right. Okay. Now, I'd like to go to another neighbor of Japan, which is South Korea. What is your take on the Japan-South Korea relationship during Abe?
I think Prime Minister Abe believed that him, with his support from the conservatives within the LDP, might not be the person that is able to come up with some agreement with South Korea, ROK, without the backlash from the more hawkish wing of the party, and that culminated in the Comfort Women Agreement. And I think that it hasn't been brought through in a positive manner yet on ROK's side, makes him more bitter about the relationship than he was before. And he believes that, or he believed at the point of his passing, that the ball was in ROK's court. And so I don't really know exactly what he might be thinking today, but I think he might have been happy with the possible optimistic turn, and yet he would think that it is still in ROK's court to improve the relationship.
I see. Well, the political fallout of the scandal is being felt even more given Abe's prominence within the party. So, Tsuyoshi, Prime Minister Kishida has to fix the situation and the issue with the Unification Church. How is he going to fix the reputational damage to the LDP?
He has to restore the public trust that has been lost. As I mentioned earlier, the cabinet's approval rating has fallen to its lowest level since he took office. That's because it rushed ahead with the state funeral and the revelations about ties between the former Unification Church and the LDP. The church's practice of forcing followers to make big donations and buy expensive items has been recognized as a major social problem. Kishida has made it clear the LDP will cut ties with the church, but there have been a drumbeat of revelation of ties with LDP lawmakers. Some received key support in their election campaigns, so it won't be easy.
So the Diet begins an extraordinary session next week. How will the administration proceed?
The session will likely take up ties between politicians and the church. Kishida must give a full account to satisfy the public. This comes as he faces a mountain of other issues, such as rising prices, the need to strengthen defense capabilities in case of an emergency over Taiwan, and medium and long-term energy policies. There is also the huge challenge of paving the way for an economic recovery. With Abe off the stage, Kishida will be truly tested.
I see. Thank you, Tsuyoshi. Now, as people continue to lay flowers at Nippon Budokan, let's head back to our correspondent in the field, Raja Pradhan. So, Raja, thousands paying their respects inside the Budokan. How have people on the streets been talking about this funeral and Abe himself?
Well, Miki, Japanese people are generally quite reserved when they're in public, but you can definitely feel the emotion here at times. I saw many people crying, some were taking selfies, and others just remained silent. We were able to talk to one couple in their 60s, and they said Abe worked hard for the country, so they wanted to pay their respects. We also spoke with two women in their 20s, and they said Abe was their prime minister for much of their lives. They saw him as Asia's leader, and they said holding a state funeral for him was a good idea. But as we have been reporting, many others do not agree. I only saw a few protesters right here, but this afternoon there were several big demonstrations against holding the state funeral. We even heard the sound of the chants coming not so far from here. There was one this morning near the funeral venue, the Budokan Arena, where about 600 people gathered to voice their opposition. They were calling for the event's cancellation. And in the afternoon, about 2,500 gathered at a large park to protest. The state funeral divided Japan, with many against using public money for it. But in the end, it was held, providing closure for those who attended. That's all for me now. Back to you, Miki.
Thank you very much, Raja. As we've been discussing, Abe spent a lot of energy trying to change Japan's place in the world. NHK World's Kikuyama Kengo asked a Japanese expert to analyze his diplomatic legacy.
Abe Shinzo held a summit with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in 2014. The meeting in Beijing came at a rocky time for relations between the two countries. So many saw the meeting as a mark of success for Abe. International political science professor Izumikawa Yasuhiro says Abe built a working relationship with China amid tensions over territory.
Despite his nationalistic kind of anti-Chinese sort of inclinations, he nonetheless believed that the stability between Tokyo and Beijing serves Japanese interest, and he conducted the policy towards China based on that belief. I think worked very hard not to make China a clear enemy of Japan while cooperating with the United States on security matters.
But China was also his focus around security. Izumikawa credits Abe with creating the framework for what's known as a free and open Indo-Pacific. He says Abe was considered the first leader to put forward the concept, which was meant to counter China's growing influence in the region.
He tried to create the situation in Asia so that other major powers, not only the United States, but also India and Australia, were also involved. And try not to contain China, but to create a situation in which China have to be careful not to push other countries too hard.
Russia was Abe's other big challenge. He wanted to negotiate a peace treaty with Vladimir Putin. It involved 4 Russian-held islands that Japan claims and calls the Northern Territories. The Japanese government maintains the islands are an inherent part of Japan's territory. It says the islands were illegally occupied after World War II. Abe and Putin agreed to accelerate talks based on a 1956 joint declaration. It stated that Russia would hand over 2 of the smaller islands to Japan. Izumikawa says the negotiations were a failure for Abe's administration.
A lot of people expected that there might be some kind of a breakthrough or some Russian concessions. President Putin did not make any concession, in fact. As a result, the problems still persist and, no end in sight right now.
Izumikawa says Abe was able to create an image of Japan as an international power, with some diplomatic sore spots still unresolved. Kikuyama Kengo, NHK World.
Abe was also focused on building strong ties with the United States. He had a close relationship with 2 presidents at a time when the balance of power in the world had started to change. NHK World's Honda Mina has that story.
It was a historic visit. In 2016, Abe Shinzo hosted U.S. President Barack Obama in Hiroshima. It was the first time a sitting president had come to the city that the U.S. destroyed with an atomic bomb in World War II. That same year, the 2 leaders visited Pearl Harbor. The trips were symbolic of Abe's efforts to strengthen Japan's relationship with the U.S.
I think in healing the wounds of the war with the United States, I think he did quite well.
Kent Calder is an expert on East Asian politics and met Abe a number of times. He says Abe was able to inspire trust in American leaders on both sides of the political spectrum.
Prime Minister Abe was very successful, I think, on the public diplomacy side, which is a bit of a paradox given this relatively hawkish and controversial image. I think he was able to get strong personal relations with both President Obama and President Trump.
Calder says Abe and the leaders bonded over a common threat. He says Abe was concerned about a rising China. He felt Japan's security alliance with the U.S. needed to be expanded to regions where China was becoming more assertive. It led to Abe's push for a free and open Indo-Pacific.
It's not something that naturally the United States would emphasize. So from that point of view, to present the idea, to convince the U.S. to take it up, and then to make it a key point of American diplomacy, I think that was a major achievement.
Critics say the U.S. pushed Abe to invest much more on Japan's defense. Others say their alliance has become more important as democracies come under threat. Honda Mina, NHK World.
So, Professor Hikotani, as we just heard, Trump faced pressure to boost defense spending, especially from Donald Trump. How do you think that's impacted Japan's defense policy going forward?
Yes. I think this is what we're witnessing right now. Towards the end of this year, there will be a review of the national security strategy, and that it is expected that the defense budget will increase. And I think it's something that is not just reactive, but something that has to be taken on, or there's a strong perception that in order to not allow for a vacuum in the Asia-Pacific region, also seeing what has happened in Ukraine, that there could be a unilateral change of the status quo by force, there is more consensus in a way in Japan that there needs to be some defense buildup. So it didn't quite happen during the Abe administration, but he was a staunch supporter of that after his retirement, and that right now we're seeing that happen without Prime Minister Abe, which is somewhat ironic since he would have been very much an advocate of what we're seeing today.
And we've also heard that territorial issues with countries such as Russia remain unresolved. What prevented Abe, do you think, from being able to find solutions to these disputes?
Yes, I think it was a difficult call to begin with to negotiate with Vladimir Putin over territories. But I think there was two objectives to Prime Minister Abe in dealing with Russia. One was the territorial issue and overcoming the post-war issues. But I think he also wanted to create a relationship with Russia in a way to prevent Russia and China to be both on the side of the opponent for Japan. So there was a strategic intention of Prime Minister Abe to try to reach out to Russia and to China and to maintain some kind of a managed relationship between the two. So although I think, as Professor Izumikawa said, it is clear that at this point, and I think for the time being, that the territories are not coming back from Russia. Still, I think the effort was not just for the territories, and that's something that we have seen to be a legacy that has not been fulfilled, and something that would probably Prime Minister Abe would think that he did his best, but something that he was not able to accomplish.
Okay. And my last question, what is the most significant political legacy that Abe leaves behind?
I think the political legacy goes back to my initial point, that I think that although there's critiques, his legacy is somewhat divided, that he was the champion of Japan, and that that's something that has motivated the younger generation maybe to care a little bit more about Japan's place in the world. And although I think his intentions were somewhat halted and somewhat divisive, still I think that's what he'll be remembered for most, by how it was summarized by Prime Minister Kishida as to be courageous to do the right thing. And I think putting Japan back on the map, on the world scene, was something that was his major accomplishment, and something that people look to the Abe legacy was to make sure that Japan will be still a major player in the world. Is something he wanted to accomplish and what he was able to accomplish.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Professor Hikotani Takako from Gakushuin University International Center. Thank you, Professor, and also Masuda Tsuyoshi. Thank you so much. And that concludes our coverage of the state funeral for former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. Please stay with us for more on the funeral right here on NHK Newsline.